Hi, this is Laszlo, and today I'm going to discuss the three biggest mistakes that you can do with your AWS account. So, do you know which are these mistakes, or which could be the biggest mistakes that you can have with your AWS account? If not, stay around because we are going to discuss them one by one. But before that, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to get the updates on the latest videos that I publish. So let's start with these mistakes. So the first big mistake that you can do is to not to secure your AWS account properly. So how do you secure your AWS account properly? First of all, you would um, secure the AWS account root user. So the account root user is the account that you get when you signed up for the AWS account. You usually log into this with an email address. And this is a very powerful account. It can do anything. It cannot be restricted. So you would want to safeguard this by restricting access to it and not using it on a daily basis. So how do you do that? First of all, before you lock it away, set up a strong password on it, at least 12 characters, and multi-factor authentication, or one-time passwords, or how do you want to call it. Then create another user called an IAM user. And for this user, only give it the privileges it needs. So if it needs to handle databases, then you give it permissions to databases and so on. And then you would use this IAM user and not the account root user. This one would be, let's say, locked away, lock the credentials and put them in a safe or somewhere and do not use it. So once you have your IAM user, you would use this on a daily basis, and this will only have the privileges it needs. And even if someone logs into this IAM user, and if this IAM user doesn't have admin privileges, it will not be able to create like a new user with it, for example, and things like that. This user, of course, the IAM user should also have a strong password, at least 12 characters, and multi-factor authentication. Okay, so this is with your users, but then you would also want to tighten the security. So for example, restricting the security groups, only allowing the ports that you actually need and not opening the other ports. You can use for that also the network access control list, where you could also deny things like certain IP addresses. Then you have firewalls like the web application firewall, which I discussed in an earlier video. So you can use that to protect your endpoints. And then, of course, you should always encrypt the data, both in transit and at rest. And there are different methods of using encryption. Look to those up and use them to protect the data, so no one can read it if it intercepts it for some reason. Okay, so this was the first big mistake, not securing the AWS account, and we've seen some of the ways in which you can actually protect it and secure it. Now, the second mistake is not monitoring your AWS account. So you should always monitor the AWS account and look for things like unused resources, because this will generate costs for you. And you would want to turn off those resources if you're not using them in production or for development or things like that. You can also set up billing alerts. So whenever the cost in your AWS account goes above a certain threshold, then you would get a notification via email, for example, and you would be able to take action on that. Then you should always have CloudTrail enabled to have the logs saved to somewhere, for example, an S3 bucket. And then all these logs can be looked up to see what happened in the account, who logged in, who created what resource, and so on. And you can also set up alerts based on critical events, like for example, someone logging into the root account. Um, because if you're not using the root account as I suggested, then if someone logs in, that's a problem. So you should investigate immediately why someone logged in to your AWS account with the root user. Then finally, you could employ things like intelligent threat detection. There's a tool, for example, from AWS called GuardDuty, which can monitor your account and detect unusual things. For example, someone logging in from an unusual location, or maybe if there's some Bitcoin mining activity in your account, you can get notification on that from GuardDuty as well. And there are lots more things that GuardDuty can detect. Check it out because it's an interesting and useful service. So these were the things that you could do to fix that mistake of not monitoring your AWS account. Then let's see the third one. The third one is not backing up your data. So your data is probably the most important thing that you could have in your AWS account. And not backing it up could lead to serious consequences. You cannot recover from a disaster, for example. So you should always have a backup strategy. So this should include which data you need backing up, because not everything needs to be backed up. For example, if you have testing environments where you have test data, that maybe you don't want to back it up because you can always recreate it from a production environment. So pushing the production data to a testing environment. But production, of course, always should be backed up. Then you need to determine how often do you want to back it up, because some data needs to be backed up more often, other one not so often. This depends on your use case. Then you should also test the backups, because an untested backup is like you maybe even don't even have backups, because if the backup is corrupted or it has some problems and you cannot restore it, there's there's basically a backup that you made it and it's not usable. So you should always test the backups to restore the whole system from these, and you should use some automated process for that to restore the backups, maybe create the whole infrastructure that uses that backup and see if it can work with that data, and then turn it off. So this is one advantage of the cloud, that you can turn on and off resources as you want them, even for just testing backups. Then finally, you should have a disaster recovery strategy, and this should include replicating the data into a completely different availability zone, or even better, into a different region. Because let's say something bad happens to that AWS region. For example, I don't know, an earthquake or fire or something else that renders the whole region unusable. Then if you backed it up into a different region, you are safe, your data is safe. But one other thing that you should think about is to use a different AWS account for backing up your data. And this account should be used just for backups. And why is that? That is because if you have a breach, your main AWS account gets breached, and you have your backups there as well. The attacker might be a malicious attacker and delete everything in your account, even the backups. So you basically did the backups, but because they are in the same account that got breached, everything is deleted. So the idea here is to push them to a different AWS account, because that probably might not be breached, ideally as well. So then that data would be safer being in a different AWS account, and you could restore it from there even if your other AWS account got wiped. So this is how you prevent this third mistake, not backing up your data. So with that, I think these are the three biggest mistakes that you could do with your AWS account initially. And I've listed for each of them some strategies to prevent this mistake from happening. Hopefully you were able to implement them and you can secure your account, back up your data and so on. So I think that's it for today, for today's video. I hope you liked it. If you did, click on the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you soon with another video here on the channel.